In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a clock for project 3. The first thing is setting up the size of the clock. I'm going to use a 12-inch diameter clock, but it's up to you how big you want to make it. I probably wouldn't make it smaller, but you can make it bigger if you want. So I have to make it 12 by 12 to get that 12-inch diameter. Make sure the origin is the middle and hit OK. The hardest part of this in your mind should be, how am I going to make sure all the numbers are evenly spaced? And it's basically impossible to do that by hand. We're going to use some features of Vcarve. First, we have to make our first initial number, which is going to be the 12. So I put in the 12, and you can pick out what type of font you want. I don't really care, so I'm just going to make my 12. You want to set this to whatever size you want. Again, I'm going to leave it because it's a sample. I'm not too attached to it. It's really important that the 12 is exactly centered. A little trick to do that is click the Move tool, make sure it's in absolute and that your middle is selected, and I hit my X as 0. This is going to make it perfectly centered. If I wanted it perfectly centered in the middle, I would make Y 0 also, but I want this to obviously be up top, so I'm going to move it somewhere up top to where I like it. I like it here for now. Now I'm going to start doing my layout for the numbers. To do that, I use the circular copy tool. I click that. I make sure this is in purple, so it's selected. I have to set my rotation center. I want my rotation center to be the middle of the clock because the origin is the middle. My rotation center would be 0, 0. If your origin was the top left-hand corner or something like that, you'd have to change this. That's why we make ours the middle. It makes it easy for a lot of stuff. The rotate copies would actually, if you look over here, make each number slanted so they all look towards the middle. I think that looks good for some clock designs, especially the Roman numerals, but I don't really like it for the plain numbers. If you want to turn that on, you can, but I'm going to leave it off because I don't care for that. Obviously, we need 12 numbers, so I keep that 12, and it's going to be a complete circle, so I keep that 360. Now I have all my different numbers. Make sure it's not grouped. If it's grouped, then it would lock all these together, and you wouldn't be able to edit them unless you ungroup it. So I hit close. Now I'm going to have to go through and change all these numbers to be the correct numbers that I really want. I'm not going to show you how to do that for all of them. You get the idea. You could also change the text, the font, I guess, if you wanted to at this point, but try to pick the correct font that you want to use in the beginning. So I'd go through and change all these. I'm not going to do that because this is just a sample. Your next step is going to be getting some design for the middle here that you want. You probably want some type of design, otherwise it looks really plain. So you can bring in a picture and trace it. I'm not going to show you how to do that since you already learned how to do that. This is just a traced image. I'm going to center it, so I'm going to use that Move tool again. Now it's nice and centered. I like to put a nice decorative circle to separate the logo from the numbers. I think that looks really nice, so I'm going to use the circle tool and do that. It's optional to do this, but I really think it looks good. Your diameter is really going to be dependent on your specific design. Again, I don't care about this too much because it's a sample, so 8 inches is fine by me. I'm also going to need a little circle here for a hole that we're going to put, because the clock mechanism has a shaft that needs to go through the wood. I don't know exactly what that shaft diameter is, and it does change based on what clock mechanism you use. So you're going to have to ask me for that and then measure it with a dial caliper. I think it's close to 0.35, so I'm going to put that in for now. But make sure you actually measure it and then put in the right diameter. Then the last thing that we're going to do is make the outline for the actual clock. Remember, I said I wanted a 12-inch diameter clock, so I'm going to put in my 12 inches, and I make that circle. Again, all this stuff could change based on what you personally want. Like this circle to me is a little too small, but I don't really care right now. All my 2D design work is done, so I could start my 3D machining over here. When you're doing your machining, you really need to make sure you do it in the correct order. What should be machined first? You're not going to cut out the clock first, right? Because then when you're doing the rest of the machining, it's going to move all over the place and break, and it's going to be a complete mess. So you probably want to do all your engravings first. If you're going to make all the numbers and your logo the same flat depth, you can click it all at the same time. If you want one to be deeper than the other, then you're going to have to make it two separate tool paths. You can only make it all the same if you're going to have the same tool, same cut depth, and same type of tool path. For this, again, it's a sample. I don't really care, so I'm just going to probably make it the same flat depth, and I'm going to name it. It's very important that you name it, because as you start to be doing these more and more complicated projects, there might be problems, and if you name it, it makes troubleshooting way easier. Now I want this circle to be just a little decorative thing. You might be thinking, oh, decorative Vcarve. We actually don't want to do that. If you do a Vcarve, it's probably going to almost make it like a pocket, which is not what I want. I want it to cut on the line. And we know that profiling will cut on the line. So I'll click profile. I want it to be really small. I want it to be deep, because the deeper you go, the wider it gets. But I'm actually going to change this and set it to the V bit. And I can see how it came out. If I wanted it to be not as wide, I would change the depth so it's even shallower. I actually almost think that this middle part should be a little deeper, but it's just a sample, so I'm not going to worry about it. Remember, all your depths will change, can have an effect on how it looks. So you might have to mess around with that until you like how it looks, but for right now, this is fine. Before I actually cut out the clock, I'm going to want to drill this. I say drill, but really I mean pocket, because in Vcarve, if you drill, it has to be the exact diameter of the tool that you're using, and we don't have a tool that's 0.35 inch diameter. We only have that 1/4 inch end mill, so I have to go to pocket. When you set your cut depth, you actually have to measure the thickness of the wood, and you're going to make it smaller than the thickness of the wood. So if my wood is 0.75 inches deep, 0.7 would be good, so I could keep that 0.7. Again, you're going to have to measure your actual wood and see what it is. Then the last thing I want to do is cut the clock out. I'm going to do the profile for that. Again, you have to measure what your actual wood is. It's probably not going to be 0.75. You're going to have to actually measure it. So you could design this, then make your wood, and then come back and edit your cut depth based on how big your wood turned out. Again, assuming it's 0.75, 0.7 is good. What you're going to have to note here is that since the last tool I used was the V-bit, that's what it defaults to. It always defaults to the last tool used. But if I'm cutting it out, you never cut something out with a V-bit. You're going to want to use the end mill. All these commands will affect the overall dimensions of the clock. We're going to have a lesson talking about what this means. Inside and on the line are going to make the final product be smaller. I want it to be exactly 12 inches, so I want it to be outside the line. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in class. Then I hit calculate, and I could see my clock and make sure it looks good. You're going to have to make your actual blank 1 inch bigger in every direction, so it's okay. We're cutting right up to the edge here because the blank is going to be oversized. Now you can save it. When you save, make sure output all visible toolpaths to one file is checked. This will allow you to click and save multiple programs, or multiple toolpaths, I should say, to one program for the CNC. If that's not checked, you could see I have these two things checked, but it's only actually saving one. So you got to make sure this is checked. It's a common mistake. You're not going to be able to check everything because they use two different tools. You could see there's an error. So when you go to save this, after I check it, of course, and you update your cut depths based on measuring your actual wood, when you're actually ready to machine, you're only going to be able to save the two that use the same tool. So I would probably save this as JF and then C for clack and then 1, and then I would save the other two as JFC 2, so I could easily know which one is which. Make sure you also select the correct post processor. G-code MM is for the old CNC routers. I'll provide you the new post processor for our Shop Saver CNCs.